On today's episode of AniSA's weekly Shonen Jump rankings, we'll be discussing Zoro's backstory, Choujin X's insanity, and another new series in Shonen Jump. Before we jump right into the rankings today, I want to talk about how good this week was in general. This week I actually had 8 series that I read, the most before that was 6, and reading this many chapters was exciting going into the week, but the quality of chapters that we got just across the board was probably the best since I've started doing this. There were at least 5 chapters that could have won Chapter of the Week in the previous weeks, so that shows you how good it was. We just had a lot of series peaking. And at number 8, we have a new series alert for Doran Tororon. And this series was really exciting. I thought it had a pretty solid start, but overall, when comparing it to the other chapters that have come out this week, I didn't think it quite lived up to how good they were, but there's a lot of things to like here. The main character Dora is really compelling at the start in the fact that he wants to kill these creatures because they killed his mom, and that connection throughout the entirety of the chapter I thought worked really well. Overall, the artwork was good, but it wasn't anything better than I've seen in the other Shonen Jump chapters, if not slightly worse across the board than something like a new series like Ayashimon. And there's definitely a constant narrative coming around these stories, especially in kind of the last 5 to 10 years or so in Shonen Jump, of having characters who just don't have an ability in the magic system. Series like Black Clover, My Hero Academia, Ayashimon, another new series that just started, and now here we have characters who for some reason have no ability in what they want to do, and it's been an interesting trend. Like when you think about the original big 3, Naruto, Ichigo, and Luffy all have really good aptitude for their abilities in the series, where now we're kind of getting this new wave where it's really focusing on characters trying to come up with unique ways to go about learning their powers, but most of the time they end up just using different powers overall, just like Asta, where he has just a different set of magic essentially. And so I think that's kind of an interesting spot to be in, but I did not find it as compelling as the first chapter of Ayashimon. The one thing that this chapter really had going for it was Dora's relationship with Kusanagi. I think that's going to be by far the best thing going forward in this series, and so I hope we get to explore it a little bit more. So overall, I don't think it was a bad start to this series. I really liked the vibe of it. But comparing it to these other chapters, I think I had to rank it at the bottom because it wasn't the greatest first chapter in the world, didn't hook me like Ayashimon did just a couple weeks ago, and so for those reasons, especially with this strong of a week, it comes in at number 8, but I'm excited to keep continuing it and to see how it evolves from here. At number 7, we have Black Clover. Black Clover has had a couple of really good chapters the last few weeks, so I was really excited to continue it, and overall, didn't like it quite as much as I had liked last week's chapter. The artwork here is still, Tabata's been crushing it with his artwork as of late, but for the vast majority of this chapter, it felt like just kind of 2 big creatures punching each other for a little bit, and then at the end all the characters are like, oh no, we need to be saved, and I wonder who that's gonna be. Of course it's gonna be Asta, and that was a really great panel. I loved the kind of blank background that accompanied Asta in that cliffhanger panel. So overall, the artwork I think really carried this chapter. It wasn't a bad chapter, but again, I kind of feel this a lot recently with Black Clover, where there will be a couple of chapters where I feel like just not that much happened. It's like, oh, this person got here at the end of the chapter, so the next chapter where the action's really gonna get good. And then the next chapter, the same thing happens, and so there's been a couple pretty good chapters this month so far, but overall, this chapter just didn't really do it for me, and so the artwork puts it at number 7, but I couldn't put it any higher than that. Number 6 is Ayashimon. Ayashimon has been a really fun start to the series, but it's also had a really difficult time breaking in any higher on these rankings so far, and that is because I still struggle a little bit with the paneling. There is a handful of pages here, again, that are really, really dialogue heavy, but I feel like unnecessarily. I don't think it's explaining anything about the world that couldn't really be shown visually, and when this chapter and this series so has been at its best, it's when it lets the the visuals speak for itself. Overall though, the banter between our main characters here again is fantastic, and it's really exciting and funny to read. I actually had a laugh out loud moment early in the chapter, which was really good, and the action in this series has been consistently incredible, and we get that. The kind of formula for Ayashimon so far has been have some world building that's a little dense and heavy, which I don't love, but then have some really good character interactions and a fun fight showing how kind of horrifying and cool this world is. The artwork here is really good as well, and so that's why it's at number 6. There's a few things that I struggle with, but overall, it's been a pretty good start to this series, and I'm excited for it to delve more into the characters, because that's when I think Ayashimon will really take off, and I fully expect it to break into the top 3 coming up soon. These chapters have been really good, they've been really close, not quite there yet, but I definitely see this series being one that hopefully will stay around for a while. And then at number 5, we had the return of Kaiju number 8. Last time we saw Kaiju, we were in the middle of an amazing fight, and that was no different here. The number 2 Kaiju going up against the main officer has been incredible, and this chapter really shows how excellent Kaiju is within its storytelling. Kaiju 8 uses all the typical shonen beats, but just does it really well and adds enough of a spin on it like it does with its main character Kafka Hibino to really make the series impactful, and this chapter really encaptured that. The flashback coinciding with the action was fantastic, and I really have no complaints here. I really think this chapter was about as good as the last chapter for Kaiju 8, but the other chapters this week were just so fantastic that it ends up at number 5 here. Kaiju 8 has just been killing it across the board with its action sequences, and now with its really big emotional moments. This was classic, great shonen storytelling, and while it doesn't do anything outside of that alone is good enough to get it this ranking this week. And at number 4, I have Choujin X. This has been another series that the last few chapters have really blown me away. I really think that Ida's artwork right now is the best out of all the series that I'm reading. It feels totally unique to him, unlike some of the other series where it feels like someone else could do something of a similar quality. I don't think anyone can match his paneling right now. It is fantastic. And I'm really enjoying the unique power system of this series and how crazy it feels. I feel like things are about to get even weirder and horrifying coming up, and you get little bits of it in this chapter. Obviously, the thing to focus on here is the cliffhanger. The last 2 panels were just bizarre and horrifying, but like really intriguing, and that really lifts this chapter up above Kaiju 8. But also the action here in the baseball match turned out really well. We got a nice little character moment, and then we got some really great panels to convey how insane of a throw this guy has. Overall, I thought Choujin X crushed it, and Choujin X really came off of a fantastic month. But in the future, we're still looking for more and more character development here, because once that happens, this series is really going to explode. And at number 3, we have One Piece. This was my most anticipated chapter going into the week, because Oda typically doesn't make 2 chapters that I don't enjoy back to back, and this was no different. We got more of Zoro's backstory and a lot more of his fight with King. I felt like there was good progression here, and you got to see Zoro using Conqueror's Haki, which was just a fantastic moment that has been built up for so long. So that was really great, and just seeing Zoro's backstory got me really excited for what's to come and got me really emotional. This series has been going on for so long, and yet it still feels so true to who the characters were in those first handful of chapters. And Zoro's backstory is one among a lot of the Straw Hats that I think most people consider to be one of the weaker ones, but I think we're going to get even more here in Wano. I think a lot of us have thought that, and the fact that it's starting to happen is just making me really excited. I think it's awesome that Oda is revisiting backstories this late in the series, and it still feels organic and purposeful, and I cannot wait to see where this goes next. This chapter was fantastic, and Zoro fans can be hype about it because he really deserves it. This chapter was amazing. Number 2, we have Blue Box. This series has consistently blown me away, and this chapter was no different. Hina's moment is the best part and the highlight of the chapter, especially at the end of it. Hina is a fantastic character, and her inclusion in this story is really important, and it seeing her freak out at the end of the chapter because she didn't specify that she wanted to go on a one-on-one date was kind of heartbreaking. And the fact that this series, even though we kind of know that Hina is not a part of the main relationship, the fact that I can feel so sad for her because she isn't getting the chance to go out with Taiki was really, really good. And so this chapter was fantastic, and it also had some amazing action panels. This series is at its best when it still involves sports, because it gives it its unique twist. And these panels were as good as anything in the magazine this week. And so when you put those two together, and it just creates this really great feeling of an actual high school setting, and also having this great romance go along with it just gives you all the feels. And so this chapter was fantastic. Blue Box is consistently fantastic. If you haven't started reading Blue Box yet because you don't want to read romance, or you don't really read a lot of sports shonen, trust me, I think you'll enjoy it. It has continued to blow me away. And then at number 1, we have PPPPP. Last week I said this series is struggling a little bit. It had been consistently near the bottom of my rankings for the last few weeks, and I really needed to see it turn around. A lot of the paneling got way too dense for this series, and it didn't get to focus on the emotions that come with playing the piano. And I have been calling for this series to have another sequence where Lucky plays the piano, and this chapter, oddly enough, didn't give that to me, and I still loved it. The paneling here was the best it's been pretty much throughout the entirety of this series so far. It flowed so well, but I feel like I didn't miss anything. I feel like things didn't need to be explained to me more. It just worked really perfectly, and you had the great emotional moment of Lucky and Reijiro. This really pays off the kind of slower chapters we've had the last few weeks, where we're really focusing on Reijiro's character. You know, Lucky opening that closet door and saying, "I'm here for you," when previously no one was, that we saw in Reijiro's backstory, was just really heartwarming, and I cannot wait to read the next week's chapter, because we'll get to finally see Lucky play again and really try to help his brother's dream come true. I thought it was a really beautiful chapter. It had great paneling, really solid artwork, and the emotional core of it was so good that I had to give it the number 1 spot this week. It is the one that when I finished the chapter, I just kind of sat with it for a little bit because it stirred up so many emotions in me, and that's really what I'm looking for every week. What is the chapter that makes me stop and think, or really makes me feel something? And that was PPPPP this week, and this was a series that I really liked in the start, thought it started to struggle a little bit, and so it's good to see it kind of get back to what it is so good at, and I can't wait to read the next week's chapter. And so it gets the number 1 spot for this week of 8 series, which is really impressive to me. But overall, I think the top 5 chapters were all absolutely fantastic, and it was really hard picking between a couple of them. They were all very close. So now let's move into the awards for today. For best panel, I have to give it to Choujin X. This panel of how bizarre these hands are, but how beautiful they're drawn, definitely takes the cake here. It was such a great page turn to this, and after the fight we had seen, this series again is about to explode, and the artwork that Ida has is just on another level right now. For best cliffhanger, it also has to go to Choujin X, because along with the great artwork, this is so intriguing. It makes me want to turn the page. It makes me want to read that next chapter to see just where this series is going, what's going on with this kind of world building. I thought it was incredible, so Choujin X really had a great week overall. And then most anticipated, it has to go to PPPPP. My favorite chapter of the week, of course, has me wanting to read the next chapter just as much, because we're finally going to get another great piano performance. It has to come this next chapter, and the buildup has been slow, and at times it struggled a little bit, but this last chapter was so good that I cannot wait to read PPPPP next week. And so those are the awards so far, but then I also have some statistics for the month. Every month I want to do kind of a recap about what series overall had the best stretch. And so I ran some numbers, did some statistics, had all that fun math issues, and came up with the series that performed the best in my eyes this month, and the series that performed the least best. Obviously, you need to at least have 2 chapters that come out in the month to get into these rankings, because if you had 1 chapter and you got a number 1, then it would be by far the best one, but that's not really fair comparing it to series that have released 4 chapters in the month. And so how I calculated it, first I just took the averages of where they all placed and where they're at in the rankings, and overall that's a decent mark for exactly how they've performed, but it doesn't take in everything to account because we have weeks with 5 series, weeks with 6, and then 8 series this last week. I also did some calculations in weighting each series, so during a week, if a series got a number 1 out of 8, that ranked higher than a series that got a 1 out of 5, and then of course had to take into account the fact that some series were only there 2 weeks, some series 3, and some series 4. And so here, when I'm listing the rankings, all tiebreakers were done, taking in the weighted rankings into account, but those statistics are a little too complicated to talk about, and so we'll talk about just the plain averages, and then tiebreakers were done through those extra statistics. But overall, both of those were pretty close to kind of understanding how these chapters performed over the course of the month. And so let's start with just the 7th one, and that was Ayashimon. Ayashimon averaged at a 4.6 rating, so it never broke into the top 3, and so overall, it's a very good starting series, but it's pretty easy to see that new series are going to struggle for a few weeks unless they have really fantastic first chapters to compete with a series like One Piece that has 1,000+ chapters, or Black Clover that's in the hundreds. Once the story starts to get going, I expect it to get more into the pack here, but overall right now it's at number 7. Then at number 6, we actually have Black Clover. Black Clover really struggled in the first week and the last week of this month, and so it averaged at a number 4 rating. It had multiple weeks at number 2, but because it got 7th place out of 8 this week, that really made it struggle, and I think Black Clover just needs to refine its focus again. There was just too many chapters over this last week where it just didn't seem like we were focusing on anything that mattered, even though we're in a huge battle right now and a huge climax of an arc. Then at number 5, we had PPPPP. Obviously, it was saved by a number 1 spot this week. It averaged out at a 3.5, so pretty good. Overall, it's not consistently in the top 3 every week, but that number 1 chapter really saved its statistics for the month, but before that it would have been lower than Black Clover. Then at number 4, we actually have One Piece at a 3.3. One Piece has kind of been all over the board this month. It had a great chapter, a chapter I rated pretty highly this week, and then a low chapter last week. As the months go on, I expect One Piece to probably continue its rise up. It ranks at number 4. I don't know how many months there will be where it ranks outside of the top 3, but maybe that's how it will be until we get to the main conflict between Luffy and Kaido, where all of those chapters will be bangers. Then at number 3, we have Blue Box, which rates at an average of 3, and it actually tied with our number 2 spot, but when you take into account the other statistics, it didn't quite reach its potential as much as the other series, so it lost that tiebreaker. Blue Box, I think, is consistently getting close to top 3. It hasn't had a 1 yet, but it doesn't ever go low. It's just very consistent. The artwork is always great. The story, the paneling always works out well. They never slam us with dialogue and really get me frustrated. But there haven't been any chapters with unbelievable revelations or insane emotional moments. They've all just been really good. And so Blue Box is kind of the model of consistency, I would say, right now in this last month in the magazine. Then at number 2, we have Kaiju 8, so also at number 3, but it rated a little bit higher. Obviously, it only had 2 chapters this month versus Blue Box's 4, so Blue Box definitely had a harder time getting this high on the rankings, but Kaiju 8's 2 chapters were fantastic. They were both chapter of the week type material, even though one of them rated at 5, so I had to give it to Kaiju 8. This series has been crushing it since the moment that I read it, and the only thing that can hold it back seemingly is its release schedule, but it has been pretty consistent, releasing about every 2 weeks, and so there might be a month or 2 that comes where it only gets, 1 chapter and isn't allowed to be, kind of on these official rankings at the end of the month, but this month it did, and it ranks in at number 2. And then at number 1, we have Choujin X with an average of 2.3. Choujin X had 3 chapters this month, and they were all fantastic. It kind of blew everyone out of the water. It definitely won this month. It's had some really good character moments, fantastic action, and artwork that's just on another level. So Sui Ishida, really, I went into this month struggling with the series a little bit, and he really has turned it around, and I would expect no less from the author of Tokyo Ghoul, but it has been really fantastic reading Choujin X up until this point, and seeing it take the number 1 spot, I think is really cool, and I'm curious to see if it will keep this up. You know, will it continue to kind of be the juggernaut of these rankings? Well, for the first month, it is. So let me know, what are your favorite series that you're reading right now in Shonen Jump? For me, I guess it has to be Choujin X. The statistics don't lie. Still working my way through some series, and definitely by the end of the year, I hope to catch up to those. It's really fun starting these new series too, and I'm excited to see where they go, especially Ayashimon. I've been really impressed with it so far, even though it hasn't quite cracked the top of these rankings. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Again, comment down below, let me know, and if you want to hear me talk more about things, you know, about series that I'm reading and everything like that, especially as I catch up to something like Sakamoto Days and Undead Unlock, follow me on Twitter and I'll be posting about that and we can have conversations there. So I hope you enjoyed this episode of the weekly Shonen Jump rankings, and I will see you next week.